The hot Texas sun beat down on Elena's face as she stood on the wooden steps of the courthouse. Her hands were shaking, but she kept them steady at her sides. The iron shackles around her wrists felt heavier than they really were. People from all over Cedar Ridge had come to watch. Some pointed and whispered. Others just stared. Elena tried to hold her head high. Her father had always told her to be proud no matter what happened. But it was hard to feel proud when you were standing like a piece of property waiting to be sold. "Look at her," someone in the crowd said loud enough for everyone to hear. "Acting all high and mighty when she's nothing but a debt slave now." A woman laughed. Her family should have thought about that before they borrowed money they couldn't pay back. Elena's cheeks burned with shame. But she didn't look down. She couldn't give them that satisfaction. Her little brother Miguel and sister Rosa were somewhere in that crowd, watching their big sister being treated like cattle at market. She had to be strong for them. The auctioneer, a fat man with a gray beard, climbed up beside her. He wiped sweat from his forehead with a dirty handkerchief. "All right, folks," he called out. "We're here today because the Vasquez family owes $200 to various merchants in town. Since they can't pay, their eldest daughter will work off the debt according to territorial law." Elena remembered the day everything fell apart. Her father had been hurt in a mining accident 6 months ago. He couldn't work anymore. The doctor bills kept coming. Then the store owners wanted their money. Food cost money. Medicine cost money. Everything cost money they didn't have. "The girl's 18 years old," the auctioneer continued. "She can cook, clean, and she's got some schooling. Good for household work or whatever else needs doing." The way he said it made Elena feel sick to her stomach. Men in the crowd started looking at her differently now. She saw greed in some of their eyes. Others looked at her like she was a prize they wanted to win. A few looked hungry in a way that made her want to wrap her arms around herself. "Bidding starts at $50, the auctioneer announced. "50, called out Jim Bradley, who owned the general store. Elena knew him. He was mean to his current workers and always smelled like whiskey. $75. This came from Pete Wilson, a rancher who lived alone and had a reputation for being rough with women. Elena's heart pounded. She wanted to run, but where could she go? The sheriff was standing right there, making sure she didn't try anything. Her family needed this money to survive. If she ran away, they'd starve. "100, shouted another voice. The bidding went back and forth. Elena felt like she was watching it happen to someone else. How had her life come to this? Just last year, she had been planning to maybe become a teacher. She loved books and learning. Now she was being sold like a horse. "150, called Pete Wilson again. He was grinning in a way that made Elena's skin crawl. The crowd was getting excited now. This was better entertainment than they'd had in months. Some people were placing bets on who would win. Others were making jokes about what the winner would do with his prize. Elena thought about her mother, who had died when Rosa was born. What would she think of this moment? Would she be ashamed? Would she understand that Elena had no choice? "200, someone yelled. Elena closed her eyes for a moment. When she opened them, she saw a little boy pushing through the crowd. It was Miguel, her 8-year-old brother. His face was red from crying. Rosa was right behind him, holding onto his shirt. "Elena," Miguel called out. "Don't go. Please don't go." The sheriff moved toward the children, but Elena caught his eye. "Please," she said quietly. "Let me talk to them." He nodded and stepped back. Elena knelt down as much as the shackles would let her. "Miguel, Rosa, listen to me. This is going to help our family. The money will buy food and medicine for Papa. I'll be okay. But what if we never see you again?" Rosa whispered. "You will," Elena promised, though she wasn't sure if it was true. "I'll find a way to visit. And when I've worked off the debt, I'll come home." Miguel wiped his nose on his sleeve. "The other kids at school say bad things will happen to you." Elena's heart broke a little more. "Don't listen to them. I'm strong, remember? And I'm smart. I can take care of myself." The auctioneer was getting impatient. "Can we get back to business here?" Elena stood up and faced the crowd again. The bidding started up once more. The price kept going higher. 250, 275, 300. She looked at all the faces staring at her. Most of them she'd known her whole life. The baker who used to give her sweet rolls when she was little. The blacksmith who had taught her father his trade. The women who used to smile and chat with her mother at church. Now they all just watched like she was a show put on for their entertainment. 325, Pete Wilson called out again. He was sweating now. probably reaching the limit of what he could afford. Elena prayed silently. Not him, she thought. Anyone but him. She'd heard stories about how he treated the women who worked for him. None of them ever stayed long, and they always left town quickly when they did go. The auctioneer looked around the crowd. 325 going once. Going twice, Elena held her breath. In a few seconds, her fate would be decided. She would belong to Pete Wilson, and there was nothing she could do about it. She squeezed her eyes shut and waited for the hammer to fall. That's when she heard a voice that changed everything. $500. The crowd went completely silent. Elena's eyes snapped open. $500? That was more money than most people in Cedar Ridge saw in a year. Who would pay that much for a work contract? Everyone was looking around, trying to see who had spoken. Elena searched the faces until she found him. A tall man in work clothes stood near the back of the crowd. He had dark hair and serious eyes. She'd never seen him before, but something about the way he stood told her he wasn't the kind of man who said things he didn't mean. Did you say 500? The auctioneer asked, clearly shocked. The stranger nodded. $500. Pete Wilson's face turned red. That's impossible. Nobody has that kind of money. The stranger reached into his jacket and pulled out a leather pouch. The sound of gold coins clinking together carried across the silent square. Elena had never heard such a beautiful sound. 500 going once, the auctioneer said, his voice shaking with excitement. Going twice. The hammer came down with a bang that seemed to echo forever. Elena's legs almost gave out. She'd been saved from Pete Wilson, but what did this stranger want with her? And why had he paid so much? As the crowd began to break up, the man walked toward the courthouse steps. Up close, Elena could see that his clothes were well made but worn from hard work. His hands looked strong, like he was used to using them. Most importantly, when he looked at her, she didn't see the hunger or greed she'd seen in other men's eyes. What's your name? He asked quietly. Elena, she managed to say. He nodded. I'm Thomas McReady. Don't worry. Things are going to be different now. Elena didn't know what to believe anymore, but for the first time all day she felt like maybe, just maybe, everything might be okay. Elena watched as Thomas McReady counted out gold coins into the auctioneer's sweaty palm. Each coin made a soft clink as it hit the wooden table. She'd never seen so much money in one place before. The auctioneer's eyes got bigger with each coin. This is highly unusual, the sheriff said, scratching his beard. Most work contracts go for under 200. Why are you paying so much? Thomas finished counting and looked up. His face was calm, but Elena could see something deep in his eyes. Pain, maybe, or loneliness. My boy needs a mother, he said simply. The words hit Elena like a physical blow. A mother? She wasn't ready to be anyone's mother. She was barely an adult herself. But before she could say anything, Thomas was already signing the legal papers that made her his responsibility. Pete Wilson pushed through the crowd, his face still red with anger. This ain't right, he shouted. I was winning that bid fair and square until this stranger showed up. Thomas didn't even look at him. He just kept writing his name on the papers with steady hands. The bidding was open to everyone, he said calmly. I made a higher offer. That's how auctions work. But $500? Pete's voice cracked. What kind of work you planning to have her do that's worth that much? Now Thomas did look up, and Elena saw something dangerous flash in his eyes. The kind of work that's none of your business. The sheriff stepped between them. All right, that's enough. The auction's over. Everyone go home. Elena felt hands on her wrists as someone unlocked the shackles. The iron fell away, leaving red marks on her skin. She rubbed her wrists, hardly believing she was free from those awful chains. Elena. Miguel came running up to her with Rosa close behind. They wrapped their arms around her waist, holding on tight. Are you really going away? Rosa asked, her voice muffled against Elena's dress. Elena knelt down to hug them properly. I have to, sweetheart. But remember what I told you. This will help our family. Miguel looked up at Thomas with suspicious eyes. Are you going to hurt my sister? Thomas knelt down too, putting himself at eye level with the boy. No, son. I'm going to make sure she's safe and has everything she needs. Promise, Miguel demanded. I promise, Thomas said, and something about the way he said it made Elena believe him. An older man with gray hair approached them. Elena recognized him as Dr. Hayes, who had been treating her father. Thomas, he said, I heard what happened here. This is a good thing you're doing. Thomas stood up and shook the doctor's hand. Doc Hayes, I didn't know you knew the family. I've been treating Elena's father since his accident. They're good people who've had some bad luck. The doctor turned to Elena. Your father's going to be proud when he hears about this. The money from your contract will pay for his medicine and keep food on the table for months. Elena felt tears starting in her eyes. Will you tell him I love him? And that I'll write letters as soon as I can? Of course, dear. The doctor patted her shoulder gently. You're very brave. Thomas cleared his throat. We should get going. It's a long ride to the ranch and I want to get there before dark. Elena hugged Miguel and Rosa one more time. Be good and help take care of Papa, she whispered. I'll see you again soon. As they walked toward a wagon parked on the side of the street, Elena got her first real look at Thomas McReady. He was tall and broad-shouldered, with the kind of build that came from years of hard physical work. His hair was dark brown with just a few gray streaks, and his clothes were simple but clean. Most importantly, he moved with the confidence of a man who was comfortable with himself. The wagon was well built, but clearly used for work, not show. A spotted horse stood patiently in the traces, occasionally swishing its tail at flies. In the back of the wagon sat a boy who looked to be about 8 years old. Jamie, Thomas said. This is Elena. Elena, this is my son Jamie. The boy looked at Elena with eyes that were the same color as his father's, but somehow older than they should be. He had messy brown hair and clothes that were clean but patched in several places. Hello, he said quietly. But Elena could hear wariness in his voice. Hello, Jamie, Elena said gently. It's nice to meet you. Jamie didn't answer. He just scooted over to make room for her in the wagon. Thomas helped Elena climb up into the seat beside him. His hand was warm and steady, and he didn't hold on longer than necessary. That was a good sign. Some men would have used any excuse to touch her. Are you comfortable? He asked. Elena nodded, though comfortable wasn't exactly the right word. She was sitting next to a complete stranger who had just bought her like a piece of property. She didn't know where they were going or what he expected from her. But at least she wasn't with Pete Wilson. Thomas clicked his tongue, and the horse started moving. The wagon wheels creaked as they rolled down the main street of Cedar Ridge. Elena looked back and saw Miguel and Rosa standing with Dr. Hayes, watching her leave. She waved until they were too far away to see. How far is your ranch? Elena asked. About 2 hours if we don't push too hard, Thomas replied. It's not much to look at, but it's home. They rode in silence for a while. Elena tried to think of something to say, but what did you talk about with a man who had just bought your work contract? The whole situation was so strange that she didn't know how to act. Finally, Jamie spoke up from the back of the wagon. Papa, why did you bring her? Thomas was quiet for a moment. We talked about this, son. The house needs taking care of, and you need someone to help with your schooling. I don't need help with school, Jamie said stubbornly. I can read just fine. Reading isn't the only thing you need to learn, Thomas said patiently. Elena turned around to look at Jamie. What's your favorite book? She asked. Jamie's expression softened a little. I like the stories about King Arthur and his knights. Those are wonderful stories, Elena said. Have you read about Lancelot and Gawain? Some, Jamie admitted. But some of the words are too hard. Maybe I could help you with those, Elena offered. I love those stories too. Jamie looked at her with new interest, but then his face closed off again. We'll see, he said. Elena understood. The boy was protecting himself. He probably missed his mother terribly and didn't want to get attached to someone new who might leave him. She would have to be patient. The countryside around them was beautiful in a harsh way. Rolling hills covered with dry grass stretched as far as Elena could see. Occasional stands of oak trees provided shade, and in the distance she could see mountains rising against the sky. It was different from the town, where buildings crowded together and the air always smelled like smoke and horses. It's very pretty out here, Elena said. Thomas glanced at her with surprise. Most people from town think it's too empty. I like the space, Elena said honestly. It feels like you can breathe. Something in Thomas's expression relaxed. That's what I've always thought too. As they rode, Elena found herself stealing glances at the man beside her. His hands on the reins were steady and sure. When the horse shied at a rabbit running across the road, Thomas calmed it with a few quiet words. He seemed like the kind of person who thought before he spoke and meant what he said. But Elena still couldn't understand why he had paid so much for her contract. $500 was a fortune. What did he expect in return? Mr. McReady, she said carefully, I want to be honest with you. I can cook basic meals and keep house, but I'm not experienced with ranch work. I don't want you to think you paid for something I can't deliver. Thomas looked at her for a long moment. What I paid for was your freedom from that crowd back there. Everything else we can figure out as we go. Elena felt something tight in her chest loosen a little. Maybe this strange arrangement would work out after all. The sun was getting lower in the sky when Thomas pointed ahead. There's the ranch. Elena looked where he was pointing and saw a simple wooden house sitting in a valley between two hills. There was a barn, a few outbuildings, and a corral with several horses. It wasn't fancy, but it looked solid and well-maintained. It's nice, Elena said, and she meant it. It's home, Thomas said simply. As the wagon rolled up to the house, Elena realized her new life was about to begin. She didn't know what challenges lay ahead, but for the first time since this whole ordeal started, she felt something that might have been hope. The wagon wheels crunched on gravel as they pulled up to the ranch house. Elena's heart was beating fast as she looked at what would be her new home. The house was bigger than she'd expected from a distance. It had a wide front porch with 2 rocking chairs and a wooden swing that looked handmade. Flower boxes sat under the windows, though the flowers inside had wilted from the heat. Thomas helped her down from the wagon, and Elena got her first real look around. The barn was painted red but needed a fresh coat. Chickens pecked at the ground near a small coop. In the corral, 3 horses lifted their heads to watch the newcomers. Everything looked lived in but cared for. It's not much, Thomas said, following her gaze. It's more than I expected, Elena replied honestly. After living in a tiny 2-room house in town, this ranch looked like a mansion. Jamie jumped down from the wagon and ran toward the house. I'm going to check on my rabbit, he called over his shoulder. Don't forget to feed him, Thomas called back. Elena watched the boy disappear around the side of the house. He has a pet rabbit? Found it when it was just a baby. Its mother had been killed by a fox. Thomas pulled her small bag from the wagon. Jamie nursed it back to health. He's good with animals. They walked up the porch steps together. Thomas opened the front door and gestured for Elena to go first. She stepped inside and stopped in surprise. The house was clean. Not just tidy, but really clean. The wooden floors had been swept and mopped. There were no cobwebs in the corners or dust on the furniture. The windows sparkled, letting in the evening light. Elena had expected a bachelor's house to be messy and dirty, but this looked like someone had been taking very good care of it. You keep a nice house, she said. Thomas's cheeks got a little red. Jamie and I do our best. We learned pretty quickly that if we didn't keep up with things, they'd get away from us fast. The front room had a stone fireplace, 2 comfortable-looking chairs, and a bookshelf filled with books. Elena's eyes went straight to the books. She could see novels, farming guides, and what looked like school textbooks. You can read any of those you want, Thomas said, noticing where she was looking. Thank you, Elena said, surprised by the offer. Most work contracts didn't include privileges like borrowing books. Thomas led her through the house, showing her the kitchen, which was bigger than her family's entire house had been. A wood-burning stove sat against one wall, and shelves lined with dishes and cooking supplies covered another. A large table with 4 chairs sat in the center. This is where we eat, Thomas explained. I usually cook, but if you want to take over that job, I won't complain. I'm not much of a cook, Elena nodded. I can handle the cooking. Good. Thomas opened a door at the back of the kitchen. This would be your room. Elena stepped inside and gasped. The room had a real bed with a quilt that looked handmade. There was a small dresser, a washstand with a mirror, and even a window that looked out toward the mountains. It was the nicest room she'd ever had. This is mine? She asked. It's yours, Thomas confirmed. The door has a lock on the inside. You can use it whenever you want privacy. Elena looked at him sharply. The fact that he mentioned the lock meant he understood she might be afraid of him. It was a small thing, but it made her feel safer. There's a washroom just down the hall, Thomas continued. It has a real bathtub. We have good water from a well, so you can take baths whenever you need to. Elena had never had access to a real bathtub before. At home, they'd heated water in pots and washed in a tin basin. Thank you, she said quietly. Jamie's room is upstairs and mine is at the other end of the hall, Thomas said. So you'll have plenty of space to yourself. They went back to the kitchen, where Jamie was waiting with a glass of water for Elena. Papa thought you might be thirsty, he said shyly. That's very thoughtful. Elena said, accepting the glass gratefully. The water was cool and sweet, better than anything she'd had in town. Thomas sat down at the kitchen table and gestured for Elena to do the same. Jamie climbed into the chair across from her, watching her with curious eyes. "I think we should talk about how things work around here," Thomas said. "I want to make sure we all understand each other." Elena set down her water glass and folded her hands in her lap. This was probably where he would tell her all the rules and expectations. "First," Thomas said, "this is a working ranch. We have cattle, horses, and chickens. There's always something that needs doing. I won't expect you to do heavy ranch work, but I hope you'll help with whatever you can." Elena nodded. "I'm willing to learn." "Second, Jamie needs schooling. He's smart, but he needs more education than I can give him. If you could help with that, I'd appreciate it." "I'd like that," Elena said, looking at Jamie. The boy ducked his head, but she thought she saw a small smile. "Third," Thomas continued, "you're not a prisoner here. You can go to town whenever you need to, and you can write letters to your family. If you want to visit them, we can arrange that." Elena felt tears prick her eyes. She hadn't expected any of this kindness. "Last," Thomas said, and his voice got more serious. "I want you to understand something important. I know the way you ended up here wasn't your choice. I know you might be scared about what I expect from you, so I'm going to tell you straight out. I don't expect anything from you except honest work. This is a business arrangement, nothing more." Elena looked at him carefully. "What about what you said earlier? About Jamie needing a mother?" Thomas glanced at his son, who was listening intently. "Jamie needs a woman's influence in his life. Someone to help him learn things I can't teach him. But I'm not asking you to love him like your own child. I'm just asking you to care about his well-being." "What happened to his mother?" Elena asked gently. Jamie's face went sad, and Thomas reached over to squeeze his shoulder. "She died of fever 2 years ago," Thomas said quietly. "We've been managing on our own since then, but it's been hard." Elena understood now why the house was so clean, and why both father and son seemed so careful about everything. They'd learned to take care of themselves, but they were missing something important. They were missing the warmth that came from having a family. "I'm sorry for your loss," Elena said to both of them. "Thank you," Thomas replied. Jamie suddenly spoke up. "What happened to your mama?" "Jamie," Thomas said in a warning voice. "It's okay," Elena said. "She died when my little sister was born. I helped raise Rosa and Miguel after that." Jamie looked at her with new interest. "So you know about taking care of kids?" "A little," Elena said, "though you're older than they are. You probably don't need as much taking care of." "I can take care of myself," Jamie said proudly. "I can see that," Elena agreed. "You seem very responsible." Jamie beamed at the compliment. Thomas stood up. "I should show you where everything is so you can get settled. Tomorrow we can talk about the daily routine." As they walked around the house, Thomas pointed out where supplies were kept, how the stove worked, and where to find things like soap and towels. Elena tried to remember everything, but her head was spinning from all the changes. "Are you hungry?" Thomas asked. "I was going to make some supper." "I can cook," Elena offered. "If you show me where everything is, are you sure?" "You've had a long day," Elena smiled. "Cooking might help me feel more at home." Thomas smiled back, and Elena noticed how much younger he looked when he wasn't being serious. "In that case, I'll accept gratefully. Jamie and I are getting pretty tired of my cooking." "Papa's not that bad a cook," Jamie said loyally. "He just makes the same 3 things over and over." "What 3 things?" Elena asked. "Beans, beef stew, and burned biscuits," Jamie said, giggling. "Hey now," Thomas protested, but he was laughing too. "The biscuits are only burned sometimes." Elena found herself laughing along with them. For the first time since this whole ordeal began, she felt like maybe things really would be okay. She wasn't sure what the future held, but at least she wouldn't be facing it alone. As the sun set over the mountains and Elena began preparing dinner in her new kitchen, she realized something surprising. For the first time in months, she felt safe. Thomas McReady had bought her contract for reasons she still didn't fully understand, but he seemed like a good man. And Jamie, despite his initial wariness, was just a lonely boy who needed someone to care about him. Maybe this strange arrangement would work out better than any of them expected. Elena woke up before dawn to the sound of roosters crowing. For a moment she didn't know where she was. Then she remembered, The ranch, Thomas, Jamie, and her new life. She lay in the comfortable bed for a few minutes, listening to the sounds of the ranch waking up. She could hear Thomas moving around in the kitchen, probably starting coffee. There were other sounds, too. Horses nickering in the corral, the wind in the trees, and something she couldn't identify that sounded like cattle lowing in the distance. Elena got dressed quickly and made her bed. When she opened her bedroom door, she could smell coffee and something else. Bacon, maybe? Thomas was standing at the stove, still in his work clothes from yesterday. "Good morning," she said quietly, not wanting to startle him. He turned around with a smile. "Morning. I hope I didn't wake you. I'm used to getting up early." "I'm an early riser too," Elena said. "What time is it?" "About 5:30. I like to get the morning chores done before it gets too hot." Thomas poured coffee into a mug and handed it to her. "Jamie will sleep for another hour or so." Elena accepted the coffee gratefully. It was strong and hot, exactly what she needed. "What kind of morning chores?" "Feed the animals, milk the cow, collect eggs, check on the cattle." Thomas turned back to the stove. "Nothing too complicated, but it takes time. Can I help?" Elena asked. Thomas looked surprised. "You want to help with ranch work?" "I want to earn my keep," Elena said firmly. "You paid a lot of money for my contract. I should do whatever needs doing." Thomas studied her face for a moment. "All right. But ranch work is different from housework. It can be dirty and sometimes dangerous." "I'm not afraid of dirt," Elena said. After a quick breakfast of bacon and biscuits, Thomas led Elena outside. The morning air was cool and fresh, with just a hint of the heat that would come later. Elena had never been up this early in the country before, and she was amazed by how peaceful everything felt. Their first stop was the chicken coop. Thomas showed Elena how to scatter feed for the chickens and collect eggs from the nesting boxes. "Be careful of that red hen," he warned. "She's got a mean streak." Elena approached the nesting boxes carefully. Most of the hens moved out of the way when she reached for their eggs, but the red hen that Thomas had warned her about pecked at her hand hard enough to draw blood. "Ow!" Elena jerked her hand back, sucking on the small wound. "She got you, huh?" Thomas said sympathetically. "She's gotten all of us at least once. Here, let me show you a trick." He picked up a short stick and gently moved the hen aside before reaching for her eggs. Sometimes you have to be more assertive with animals. They respect confidence. Elena tried again with a different hen using Thomas's technique. This time she got the eggs without getting pecked. "I think I'm getting the hang of it." Next, Thomas showed her how to milk their cow, a gentle brown and white animal named Bessie. "She's pretty patient," Thomas said, "but you have to be firm and steady or she'll know you're nervous." Elena had never milked a cow before. The first few tries were disasters. Either no milk came out at all, or Bessie shifted away from her, or Elena squeezed wrong and got milk everywhere except in the bucket. Thomas was patient, showing her the right way to position her hands and explaining the rhythm of milking. "It's harder than it looks," Elena said, frustrated after another failed attempt. "Everything is harder than it looks when you're learning," Thomas said. "But you'll get it. Just takes practice." Finally, Elena managed to get a steady stream of milk into the bucket. It wasn't much, but it was progress. "I did it." "You did," Thomas agreed, looking pleased. "Tomorrow it'll be easier." Their next stop was the barn, where Thomas kept feed for the horses. Elena loved horses, but these were bigger than the ones she was used to seeing in town. They were workhorses, built for strength rather than speed. "This is Rex," Thomas said, introducing her to a huge black horse. "He's gentle as a lamb, but he's strong enough to pull a plow through anything." Elena held out her hand for Rex to sniff. His nose was soft and warm against her palm. "He's beautiful. And this is Daisy," Thomas continued, moving to a brown mare. "She's Jamie's favorite. He's been learning to ride on her." Elena spent a few minutes getting to know each horse while Thomas filled their feed buckets. She was starting to understand why people loved ranch life. There was something satisfying about taking care of animals and watching them thrive. The last stop was the cattle pasture. Thomas opened a gate and led Elena to where about 20 cows were grazing in the morning sun. They looked up when the humans approached but didn't seem concerned. "They look healthy," Elena said. Thomas's expression got serious. "They do now, but we've had some problems. Lost 5 head to disease last month and 3 more to what I think was a mountain lion." Elena could hear the worry in his voice. "Is that normal?" "It happens, but not usually this much all at once." Thomas removed his hat and ran his hand through his hair. Losing cattle means losing money. If I lose too many more, I might not be able to make it through the winter. For the first time, Elena realized that Thomas might not be as well off as she'd assumed. Yes, he'd had $500 to spend on her contract, but that might have been most of his savings. If the ranch was struggling, her presence might be an added burden he couldn't really afford. "Is that why you needed help around the house?" she asked. "So you could spend more time with the cattle?" Thomas looked at her with something like respect. "You're quick to understand things, aren't you?" Elena felt a flush of pride at the compliment. They walked back toward the house as the sun climbed higher in the sky. Elena's back was already sore from the unfamiliar work, and her hands were dirty despite Thomas's warnings to be careful. But she felt good. She was contributing something useful. Jamie was awake when they got back to the house, sitting at the kitchen table with a book. He looked up when they came in, and Elena noticed that his face was guarded again. "Good morning, Jamie," Elena said cheerfully. "Morning," Jamie replied, but he didn't smile. Thomas went to wash up, leaving Elena alone with the boy. She poured herself another cup of coffee and sat down across from him. "What are you reading?" she asked. Jamie held up the book so she could see the cover. It was a story about pirates and treasure islands. "It's pretty good, but some of the words are hard. Would you like help with them?" Jamie hesitated. "I guess." For the next few minutes, Elena helped Jamie work through some of the difficult passages. He was a smart boy, but his reading was a little behind where it should be for his age. Elena suspected that his education had been interrupted when his mother died. "You're a good reader," Elena told him. "With a little practice, you'll be able to read anything you want." Jamie looked pleased, but then his expression closed off again. "My mama used to help me with reading." Elena's heart ached for him. She must have been a wonderful teacher. "She was the best mama in the whole world," Jamie said fiercely. "I'm sure she was," Elena agreed. "And I'm not trying to replace her. I just want to help you learn if you'll let me." Jamie studied her face for a long moment. "You're not going to try to make me call you mama or anything like that?" "Not unless you want to," Elena said. "And I don't expect you to want to. We just met yesterday." Jamie seemed to relax a little. "Okay then. Maybe you can help me with my reading sometimes. I'd like that very much." Thomas came back into the kitchen looking freshly washed. "How are you two getting along?" "Elena's going to help me with reading," Jamie announced. "That's wonderful," Thomas said, and Elena could hear the relief in his voice. The rest of the morning was spent with Elena learning more about the household routine. Thomas showed her where supplies were kept, how to work the water pump, and how to manage the wood-burning stove. Everything was different from what she was used to in town. By lunchtime, Elena was exhausted. Ranch life was much more physically demanding than she'd expected. Her back hurt, her hands were blistered, and her dress was dirty despite her best efforts to stay clean. "You did good work this morning," Thomas said as they sat down to eat. "But you don't have to do everything at once. It takes time to build up to ranch work." "I want to pull my weight," Elena said stubbornly. "You will," Thomas assured her. "But pushing too hard too fast will just wear you out or get you hurt." After lunch, Elena spent time with Jamie, helping him with his schoolwork. He was behind in arithmetic as well as reading, but he was eager to learn. Elena found that she enjoyed teaching him. It reminded her of helping her younger siblings. But as the afternoon wore on, Elena began to understand just how big a challenge she'd taken on. The ranch was beautiful, and Thomas and Jamie were good people, but this life was harder than anything she'd ever done. She was going to have to learn fast if she wanted to succeed. That evening, as Elena soaked her blistered hands in cool water, she wondered if she was strong enough for this new life. Thomas had been kind and patient, but she could see the worry in his eyes when he looked at his struggling ranch. Jamie was starting to warm up to her, but he was still protecting his heart from getting too attached. Elena had wanted to prove that she could earn her keep, but after just one day, she was already realizing that it would take everything she had to make this work. The question was, did she have everything it would take? As she fell asleep that night, Elena made herself a promise. She would not give up. 3 weeks had passed since Elena arrived at the ranch, and she was finally starting to feel like she belonged there. Her hands had developed calluses from the ranch work, and she could now milk Bessie without getting kicked or making a mess. The red hen still tried to peck her, but Elena had learned to be quicker with the stick. Most importantly, Jamie was warming up to her. It had happened gradually, like ice melting in spring sunshine. First, he'd started asking for help with his reading every day instead of just sometimes. Then he'd begun telling her about his pet rabbit, whose name was Hopper. Yesterday, he'd actually smiled when she'd helped him solve a difficult arithmetic problem. Elena was in the kitchen making bread when she heard Jamie calling for his father from outside. There was something urgent in his voice that made her drop the dough and run to the window. Thomas was in the far pasture checking on the cattle, too far away to hear his son's calls. Elena could see Jamie standing by the barn, waving his arms frantically. She wiped her hands on her apron and ran outside. "What's wrong?" she called as she approached him. "It's Hopper," Jamie said, tears streaming down his face. "Something's wrong with him. He won't eat and he's just lying there." Elena followed Jamie to a small pen behind the barn where he kept his rabbit. Hopper was indeed lying on his side, breathing rapidly. His eyes were dull and he didn't react when Jamie called his name. Elena had helped care for sick animals back home, though never a rabbit. She knelt down and gently examined Hopper, being careful not to frighten him further. "When did you first notice he was sick?" she asked. "This morning when I brought him his breakfast. He didn't even try to eat the carrots, and he always eats his carrots first." Elena could see that Hopper's stomach looked swollen. She'd seen this in other small animals before. "Jamie, I think Hopper might have eaten something that's making his stomach hurt. Sometimes rabbits eat things they shouldn't." "Is he going to die?" Jamie asked, his voice barely a whisper. Elena's heart broke for the boy. She could see how much he loved this little rabbit. "I don't know, sweetheart, but maybe we can help him feel better." Elena had Jamie fetch some warm water while she went to the kitchen and mixed a small amount of salt into it. Back home, her neighbor had used this remedy for sick animals. She wasn't sure if it would work for a rabbit, but it was better than doing nothing. Using a small spoon, Elena slowly got Hopper to drink tiny amounts of the salt water. The rabbit was weak, but he swallowed the liquid. Then Elena gently massaged his stomach the way she'd seen done with sick calves. "What are you doing?" Jamie asked, watching closely. Sometimes when animals eat too much or eat something bad, their stomachs stop working properly. The massage might help get things moving again. Elena continued the treatment for several minutes. Jamie sat beside her, gently stroking Hopper's ears and talking to him in a soft voice. "It's okay, boy. Elena's going to make you feel better." After about 10 minutes, Hopper suddenly perked up a little. He lifted his head and looked around, which was more movement than he'd shown all day. "Look," Jamie said excitedly. "He's better." "A little better," Elena said cautiously. "But we need to watch him carefully. Don't give him any food for the rest of today. Tomorrow morning, if he seems stronger, you can give him a tiny bit of hay." Jamie nodded seriously. "I'll watch him all day." Elena was about to respond when she heard hoofbeats approaching. Thomas was riding back from the pasture and he looked worried. "I saw you both running around," he called as he dismounted. "What's going on?" Jamie ran to his father and explained about Hopper's illness and how Elena had helped. Thomas listened carefully, then went to examine the rabbit himself. "Looks like he's doing better," Thomas said after a moment. "What did you do?" Elena explained her treatment, feeling nervous. "I'm not a veterinarian. I was just trying something I'd seen work with other animals." Thomas looked at her with something like amazement. "You probably saved his life. I've seen rabbits die from this kind of thing." Elena felt a warm glow of pride. She'd actually been useful in a crisis. That evening, Jamie insisted on sleeping in the barn so he could watch over Hopper. Thomas allowed it, and Elena checked on both of them several times during the night. Each time, Hopper looked a little stronger. By morning, the rabbit was sitting up and had even eaten a small piece of hay. Jamie was so excited he could barely contain himself. "Elena, you're like a doctor for animals," he said at breakfast. "How did you learn to do that?" "My family couldn't afford to call the veterinarian for every sick animal," Elena explained. "So we learned to take care of them ourselves. Sometimes it worked, sometimes it didn't." "Well, it worked this time," Thomas said. "Jamie, what do you say to Elena?" Jamie looked serious for a moment, then walked over to Elena's chair and hugged her tightly. "Thank you for saving Hopper." "You're the best." Elena felt tears come to her eyes. It was the first time Jamie had hugged her, and she could feel how much he meant it. Later that day, Elena was hanging laundry on the line when she noticed a rider approaching the ranch. As the person got closer, she realized it was a woman, which was unusual. Most of their few visitors had been men on business with Thomas. The woman was older, maybe 50, with gray hair pulled back in a neat bun. She was riding side saddle and wore a dress that was too fancy for ranch visiting. "Good afternoon," the woman called as she approached. "I'm looking for Thomas McReady." "He's in the north pasture," Elena replied. "Can I give him a message?" The woman looked Elena up and down with sharp eyes. "And you are?" "Elena Vasquez. I keep house for Mr. McReady." Something in the woman's expression changed. "Ah, you're the one. I'm Helen Crawford. I own the ranch next to this one." Elena had heard Thomas mention the Crawford Ranch. It was much larger and more successful than his. "Would you like to come in and wait for him? I could make some coffee." "That won't be necessary," Helen said coolly. "I just wanted to see for myself what kind of woman Thomas had bought." Elena felt her cheeks burn. The way Helen said bought made it sound dirty somehow. "I heard about the auction," Helen continued. "Quite a spectacle from what I understand. $500 for a debt slave. People are talking." "People always talk," Elena said, trying to keep her voice steady. "Indeed they do. And what they're saying is that Thomas McReady has more money than sense, spending a fortune on a woman when his ranch is barely surviving." Elena felt a stab of worry. Was the ranch in worse trouble than Thomas had let on? "They're also saying," Helen continued, "that a man doesn't pay that much for a woman unless he expects special services from her." Elena's face went hot with anger and embarrassment. "Mr. McReady is a gentleman. Our arrangement is strictly business," Helen laughed, but it wasn't a nice sound. "My dear, I've been ranching for 30 years. I know men, and I know business. No man spends that kind of money for a housekeeper." Before Elena could respond, they heard hoofbeats. Thomas was returning from the pasture, and he didn't look happy to see Helen Crawford on his property. "Helen," he said as he dismounted, "what brings you here?" "Just being neighborly," Helen replied sweetly. "I wanted to meet your new housekeeper." Thomas's jaw tightened. "Elena is part of my household. That's all anyone needs to know." "Of course," Helen said, "though I do hope you know what you're doing. People in town are saying you're taking quite a risk bringing an unknown woman into your home with your boy." Elena saw Thomas's hands clench into fists. "What people say is none of my business. Perhaps not. But when your ranch fails and you lose everything, don't say I didn't warn you." Helen turned her horse around. "Good day, Thomas." "Miss Vasquez." Elena and Thomas watched in silence as Helen rode away. "I'm sorry about that," Thomas said finally. "Helen Crawford has never liked me, and she likes gossip even less." "Is it true?" Elena asked quietly. "What she said about the ranch barely surviving?" Thomas was quiet for a long moment. "We've had some tough years, but we'll make it through." Elena could hear the uncertainty in his voice, even though he was trying to sound confident. She realized that Helen's visit had been meant to plant seeds of doubt and worry, and it had worked. That evening, Elena found herself looking around the ranch with new eyes. Were there signs of financial trouble that she'd missed? The house was well maintained, but were there repairs being put off? The animals looked healthy, but were there fewer of them than there should be? As she helped Jamie with his lessons that night, Elena made a decision. Whatever challenges this little family was facing, she would help them get through it. Thomas had saved her from a terrible fate, and Jamie had given her his trust. She would not let them down. But as she lay in bed that night, Elena couldn't stop thinking about Helen Crawford's words. If the ranch was really in trouble, what would happen to all of them? And what would people in town think if they believed Thomas had bought her for improper reasons? Elena pulled her quilt up to her chin and stared at the ceiling. She'd thought the hardest part was learning ranch work and gaining Jamie's trust, but now she was beginning to understand that there were bigger challenges ahead. The question was, would their little family be strong enough to face them together? Elena was kneading bread dough when she heard the sound of multiple horses approaching the ranch. It was still early morning, and Thomas had just left to check on the cattle in the far pasture. Jamie was upstairs getting dressed for his lessons. She wiped her hands on her apron and went to the window. 3 men on horseback were riding up to the house, and Elena's heart sank when she recognized the one in front. It was Pete Wilson, the man who had been bidding on her contract at the auction. He looked angry. The other 2 men Elena didn't recognize, but they had the same hard look as Pete. One was tall and thin with a scraggly beard. The other was shorter but built like a bull, with arms that strained the seams of his shirt. Elena quickly locked the front door and went upstairs to find Jamie. "Jamie," she said, trying to keep her voice calm. I need you to go to your room and stay there until I come get you. Jamie looked up from putting on his boots. Why, what's wrong? Some men are here to see your father, but he's not home. I want you to stay safe upstairs until they leave. Jamie's face went pale. He was young, but he'd grown up on a ranch. He knew that men traveling in groups sometimes meant trouble. Should I get Papa's rifle? Elena's heart raced. She hadn't even thought about weapons. No, sweetheart. Just stay in your room and be very quiet. If you hear anything scary, climb out your window onto the roof and hide. Jamie nodded seriously and went to his room. Elena heard his door close softly. She went back downstairs just as heavy boots stomped onto the front porch. Someone pounded on the door hard enough to make the windows rattle. Open up, Pete Wilson shouted. We know you're in there. Elena took a deep breath and spoke through the closed door. Mr. McReady isn't here. You'll have to come back later. We ain't here for McReady, Pete said. We're here for you. Elena's blood turned cold. What do you want? To finish what we started at that auction. McReady may have outbid me, but that don't make it right. A man like him has no business owning a woman like you. I'm not owned by anyone, Elena said firmly. This is a work contract, nothing more. Pete laughed, and it was an ugly sound. Work contract? Is that what you call it? Everyone in town knows what kind of work McReady really bought you for. Elena felt sick. Helen Crawford had been right about people talking, and the talk was even worse than she'd imagined. You got two choices, the thin man called out. You can come with us willing, or we can come in and get you. You have no right to be here, Elena said. This is private property, rights? The third man spoke for the first time, and his voice was rough as gravel. What rights does a debt slave have? You belong to whoever's got the money to pay for you. Elena's mind raced. Thomas wouldn't be back for at least an hour. The nearest neighbor was Helen Crawford, who clearly didn't like them. Even if Elena could get away to get help, these men might hurt Jamie or burn down the house. I'm not coming with you, Elena said through the door. Leave now or I'll report this to the sheriff. The sheriff? Pete laughed again. Sheriff Davis owes me money. You think he's going to help you against me? Elena heard the men talking among themselves, but she couldn't make out the words. Then she heard footsteps moving away from the front door. For a moment she hoped they were leaving. Then she heard glass breaking at the back of the house. They were coming in through the kitchen window. Elena ran toward the stairs, planning to get Jamie and escape through his bedroom window. But she only made it halfway before the front door burst open. The thin man stood there, holding an axe he'd used to break the lock. Going somewhere? He asked with a nasty grin. Elena backed away from him, her heart pounding so hard she could barely think. Please, I haven't done anything to you. You exist, Pete said, walking into the house behind his friend. That's enough. The third man came in through the kitchen, shaking broken glass from his clothes. Nice place, he said, looking around. Too bad McReady won't be able to afford it much longer. What do you mean? Elena asked, though she was afraid to hear the answer. Didn't you know? Pete smiled cruelly. McReady owes money all over town. Bank's getting ready to take this place. He spent his last $500 on you, when he should have been paying his debts. Elena felt the world spinning around her. Thomas had used his last money to save her from these men, and now he was going to lose everything because of it. So you see, Pete continued, you might as well come with us now. When this place gets foreclosed, you'll be back on the auction block anyway. I won't go with you, Elena said, backing toward the stairs. The thin man moved to block her path. Yes, you will. One way or another. Elena looked around desperately for something to defend herself with. The poker from the fireplace was too far away. There were knives in the kitchen, but that was behind the men now. That's when she heard a sound that filled her with both hope and terror. Hoofbeats were approaching fast. Someone was coming, but was it Thomas or more trouble? The men heard it too. Pete went to the window and looked out. His face went dark with anger. It's McReady, he said, and he's not alone. Elena ran to the window and looked out. Thomas was indeed riding hard toward the house, and behind him were two other riders. As they got closer, Elena recognized one of them as Dr. Hayes from town. The other was a man she didn't know, but he was wearing a badge. Sheriff Martinez, the third man said nervously. I thought you said Davis was on our side. Davis is the town sheriff, Pete said through gritted teeth. Martinez is county. Different story. The men were clearly not prepared to face a county sheriff. Elena saw them exchange worried glances. What do we do? The thin man asked. We leave, Pete said. But this isn't over. He turned to Elena with hatred in his eyes. You think you're safe because McReady's got friends? You're not. This ranch is failing, and when it does, you'll have nowhere to run. We'll be waiting. The three men headed for the back door, moving quickly but trying not to look like they were running away. Elena heard them mount their horses and ride off just as Thomas and his companions reached the front of the house. Elena unlocked the front door with shaking hands. Thomas was off his horse and up the porch steps before she could even get the door fully open. Elena, are you hurt? He took her by the shoulders, looking her over for injuries. I'm fine, she managed to say. But they broke your kitchen window and they said terrible things. Thomas pulled her into a quick, comforting hug. It's okay. You're safe now. Jamie's voice came from upstairs. Elena, is it safe to come down? Yes, sweetheart, Elena called back. Your father's here. Jamie came racing down the stairs and threw himself into Thomas's arms. Some bad men came and Elena made me hide upstairs and they broke into the house. I know, son, but they're gone now. Thomas held his boy tight for a moment, then looked at Elena. Tell me exactly what happened. Elena explained everything while Dr. Hayes and Sheriff Martinez listened. The sheriff took notes and asked detailed questions about what the men had said and done. This is serious, Sheriff Martinez said when Elena finished her story. Breaking into someone's home, threatening violence, these are real crimes. Will you arrest them? Thomas asked. The sheriff looked uncomfortable. I'll try. But Pete Wilson has friends in town, and unless Elena is willing to testify in court, it'll be hard to make charges stick. Elena felt fear twist in her stomach. Testifying in court would mean telling everyone about the threats, about people thinking she was Thomas's mistress, about all the ugly gossip. But it would also mean justice. I'll testify, she said firmly. Thomas looked at her with surprise and something that might have been pride. Are you sure? It won't be easy, I'm sure. No one should be able to do what they did today. Dr. Hayes, who had been quiet through most of the conversation, finally spoke up. Thomas, there's something else you need to know. Pete Wilson's been telling people all over town that you're broke, that the bank's about to foreclose on your ranch. Thomas's face went pale. How would he know about my business with the bank? His brother works there, the doctor said gently. I don't know if it's true, but people are talking. Elena saw the pain in Thomas's eyes and understood that Pete's claim wasn't entirely wrong. The ranch was in financial trouble, and Thomas was struggling more than he'd let on. If there's anything I can do to help, Dr. Hayes continued, you know you just have to ask. I appreciate that. Doc, Thomas said quietly. After the sheriff and doctor left, Elena, Thomas, and Jamie sat around the kitchen table in silence. The broken window let in a cool breeze that made Elena shiver. I'm sorry, Thomas said finally. This is my fault. If I hadn't brought you here, none of this would have happened. Don't say that, Elena said quickly. You saved me from those men once. I'm grateful you did it again today. But they're right about one thing, Thomas said, his voice heavy with defeat. The ranch is in trouble. I used the last of my savings to pay your contract. If I can't make the next payment to the bank. He didn't finish the sentence, but Elena understood. They could lose everything. Jamie looked scared. Papa, are we going to have to leave our home? Thomas reached over and ruffled his son's hair. I don't know, boy. I honestly don't know. Elena looked around the kitchen that had become so dear to her in just a few weeks. The thought of losing this place, of this little family being torn apart, was unbearable. The storm that had been building all day finally hit that evening with a fury that Elena had never experienced before. Rain pounded the roof like bullets, and wind howled around the house so loudly that she could barely hear herself think. Lightning split the sky every few seconds, followed by thunder that shook the windows. Elena, Thomas, and Jamie huddled in the main room, trying to stay calm while the storm raged outside. They'd moved away from the windows after one particularly close lightning strike, and Thomas had lit several oil lamps in case they lost power. I've never seen a storm this bad, Jamie said, pressing close to Elena's side on the sofa. It'll pass, Thomas said, but Elena could hear the worry in his voice. Storms always do. Just then there was a tremendous crack of thunder, followed immediately by a crashing sound from outside. The house shook and all the lamps flickered. That was close, Thomas said, getting up to look out the window. I can't see anything in this rain, but something big just got hit. Elena held Jamie closer as another wave of thunder rolled over them. The boy was trying to be brave, but she could feel him trembling. Tell me a story, Jamie said quietly, like Mama used to do during storms. Elena's heart ached for him. She could only imagine how scary this storm must be for a child who had already lost so much. What kind of story would you like? A brave one, about someone who wasn't afraid of anything. Elena thought for a moment, then began to tell him about a young knight who had to rescue a village from a terrible dragon. She made her voice calm and steady, even though the storm continued to rage outside. As she talked, she felt Jamie relax against her side. Thomas came back from the window and sat down across from them. In the lamplight, Elena could see the stress on his face. She knew he was worried about more than just the storm. The confrontation with Pete Wilson had brought all their problems into the open, and now they had to face the truth about the ranch's financial situation. Elena was in the middle of describing how the knight found the dragon's cave when there was another tremendous crash. This one much closer to the house. The whole building shook and one of the oil lamps fell over. Thomas quickly caught it before it could start a fire. That was the barn, Thomas said grimly. Something hit the barn. Elena felt a chill that had nothing to do with the storm. The barn housed the horses, the cattle that were brought in for bad weather, and most of Thomas's farming equipment. If something had happened to it— I have to go check, Thomas said, reaching for his coat. You can't go out in this, Elena protested. It's too dangerous. I have to. If the animals are hurt or trapped, they'll die before morning. Elena understood the terrible choice Thomas was facing. The storm was deadly, but the animals were his livelihood. Without them, the ranch couldn't survive. But if he went out in this weather, he might not survive either. I'm coming with you, Elena said, starting to get up. Absolutely not, Thomas said firmly. Jamie needs someone to stay with him, and I won't risk both of us. Elena knew he was right, but she hated the thought of him going out alone. At least take a rope. Tie one end to the porch and hold on to it so you can find your way back. Thomas nodded. That's a good idea. While Thomas prepared to go outside, Elena tried to keep Jamie calm. But the boy had figured out what was happening. The animals are in trouble, aren't they? Jamie asked. Elena decided to be honest with him. Your father thinks they might be, but he's going to help them. Papa's the bravest man in the world, Jamie said with fierce pride. Yes, he is, Elena agreed, and she meant it completely. Thomas came back into the room wearing his heavy coat and hat. He'd found a long rope and was tying one end around his waist. I'll tie the other end to the porch post, he said. If I'm not back in an hour, don't come looking for me. Wait until the storm passes, then ride to town and get help. Elena wanted to argue, but she knew there was no point. Thomas was going to do what he had to do, regardless of the danger. Thomas tied the rope to the porch and stepped out into the storm. Elena and Jamie watched from the window as his lamp disappeared into the rain and darkness. The next hour was the longest of Elena's life. She tried to keep Jamie distracted with more stories, but her heart was pounding with worry about Thomas. The storm seemed to be getting worse instead of better, and she kept imagining all the terrible things that could happen to him out there. Finally, after what felt like forever, Elena saw a light bobbing through the darkness. Thomas was coming back and he wasn't alone. She could see the dark shapes of animals following behind him. He's back, Jamie shouted, running to the door. Thomas stumbled into the house, soaking wet and exhausted. Behind him came 3 horses and 2 cows, all looking frightened but unharmed. The barn roof collapsed, Thomas said, pulling off his wet coat. Lightning hit the big oak tree and it fell right through the middle. I managed to get the animals out, but everything else, he didn't need to finish. Elena could see the devastation in his eyes. Without the barn, they had nowhere to keep the animals safe during bad weather. Without his equipment, Thomas couldn't work the ranch properly. And without money to rebuild, the ranch would surely fail. Elena quickly got towels and helped Thomas dry off while Jamie fussed over the animals they'd brought inside. It was crowded and messy having cattle and horses in the house, but at least everyone was safe. I'm sorry about the mess, Thomas said as one of the cows left evidence of its presence on the wooden floor. Don't apologize, Elena said firmly. These animals are important. We'll clean up later. As the storm finally began to calm outside, the 3 of them sat on the floor with the animals clustered around them. It should have been a strange scene, but somehow it felt right. They were all refugees from the storm, taking comfort in each other's presence. What are we going to do now, Papa? Jamie asked quietly. Thomas was silent for a long moment. When he spoke, his voice was heavy with defeat. I don't know, son. The barn was worth more than I owe the bank. With it gone and no money to rebuild, Elena's heart was breaking for both of them. Jamie looked so small and scared, and Thomas looked like a man who had fought as hard as he could but was finally admitting defeat. There has to be something, Elena said desperately. Some way to raise money quickly. Thomas shook his head. The cattle aren't worth enough, and I can't sell them anyway without a place to keep them. The horses might bring some money, but not enough. Elena thought frantically. There had to be a solution. They'd become a family over these past weeks, and she couldn't bear the thought of losing that. Then an idea came to her. It was risky and would require a sacrifice that broke her heart, but it might work. What about my jewelry? She said quietly. Thomas looked at her in confusion. What jewelry? Elena went to her room and came back with a small wooden box. Inside were the few pieces of jewelry that had belonged to her mother. They weren't much, but they were real gold and had some small gems. These were my mother's, Elena said, opening the box. They're all I have left of her, but they might be worth something. Thomas stared at the jewelry, then shook his head firmly. No, I won't take the only things you have left of your mother. You're not taking them, Elena said. I'm giving them. This family means more to me now than anything else. Thomas looked at her with an expression she'd never seen before. There was gratitude there, but also something deeper, something that made her heart race. Elena, he said softly, you don't owe us anything. You've already given us more than we had any right to expect. I'm not doing this because I owe you, Elena said, surprised by her own boldness. I'm doing it because I love this place. I love Jamie, and She stopped, suddenly aware of what she'd been about to say, that she loved Thomas too. But that wasn't part of their arrangement, and she had no right to feel that way. Thomas was looking at her intently. And you what? Elena felt her cheeks burn. And I want us to stay together. As a family. Jamie, who had been listening to the whole conversation, suddenly spoke up. I want Elena to stay too, Papa. She saved Hopper, and she helps me with my reading, and she makes the best biscuits in the world. Thomas looked at his son, then back at Elena. Something had changed in his expression. The careful distance he'd maintained since she arrived was gone, replaced by something raw and honest. Elena, Thomas said slowly, what I'm about to say might change everything between us. Elena's heart hammered against her ribs. What do you mean? The truth is, I didn't bid on your contract just because Jamie needed help with his schooling. Thomas ran his hand through his still damp hair. I did it because when I saw you standing there, refusing to let those people break your spirit, I knew you were someone special. Someone worth saving. Elena stared at him, hardly daring to believe what she was hearing. And these past weeks, Thomas continued, watching you care for Jamie, seeing how hard you work, how brave you are. Elena, I don't think of you as hired help anymore. I haven't for a long time. What do you think of me as? Elena whispered. Thomas reached out and gently touched her hand. As the woman I'm falling in love with. Elena felt tears spring to her eyes. Thomas, I know this complicates everything, Thomas said quickly. I know you didn't come here looking for that kind of arrangement. And with the ranch failing, I have nothing to offer you except my heart. 6 months later, Elena stood in front of the mirror in her bedroom adjusting the simple white dress she'd sewn for her wedding day. It wasn't fancy, but it was beautiful in its simplicity, with delicate blue flowers embroidered around the neckline. The morning sun streaming through the window made the whole room glow with golden light. There was a soft knock on her door. Come in, Elena called. Jamie peeked his head in, wearing his best clothes and a huge grin. Papa sent me to see if you're ready. He's getting nervous, Elena laughed. Tell your father I'm almost ready. And Jamie? Thank you for walking me down the aisle today. Jamie's chest puffed up with pride. It's the most important job I've ever had. Elena looked around the room that had been her sanctuary for so many months. Soon she'd be moving her things to the larger bedroom she'd share with Thomas as his wife. The thought filled her with happiness and just a touch of nervous excitement. The past 6 months had been challenging but wonderful. Elena's mother's jewelry had indeed been valuable enough to save the ranch. The jeweler in town had paid them well for the pieces, and they'd been able to make their payment to the bank with money left over to start rebuilding the barn. The new barn was actually better than the old one, built with help from neighbors who had come to respect Thomas and Elena's hard work and determination. Even Helen Crawford had surprised everyone by donating lumber, though she'd claimed it was just because she needed the tax write-off. Pete Wilson and his friends had been arrested and charged with breaking and entering. Elena had testified in court, and despite her fears about the gossip, Most people in town had supported her. It turned out that Pete had made enemies with his bullying behavior, and many folks were glad to see him held accountable. The ranch was thriving now. They'd bought new cattle with the extra money from the jewelry sale, and Elena had started a small business selling eggs and vegetables to families in town. Her practical mind had found several ways to increase their income, and Thomas had gratefully accepted all her suggestions. Most importantly, their little family had grown stronger with each passing day. Jamie now called Elena Mama Elena and had become her devoted shadow, helping with everything from cooking to tending the animals. His reading had improved dramatically, and Elena was teaching him arithmetic and even some basic science. Elena picked up her bouquet, simple wildflowers that Jamie had picked for her that morning, and took one last look in the mirror. The frightened girl who had stood on the auction block was gone, replaced by a confident woman who knew her own worth and had found her place in the world. She opened her bedroom door to find Jamie waiting in the hallway, looking handsome in his pressed shirt and tie. "Ready?" he asked, offering her his arm like a perfect gentleman. "Ready," Elena confirmed. They walked downstairs together where a small group of guests was waiting in the main room. Dr. Hayes was there, along with Sheriff Martinez and his wife. A few neighbors had come, including, surprisingly, Helen Crawford. Even Elena's family had made the journey from town, her father walking with a cane but looking healthier than he had in months, and Miguel and Rosa practically bouncing with excitement. But Elena only had eyes for Thomas, who stood at the front of the room next to the traveling preacher they'd hired for the ceremony. Thomas looked incredibly handsome in his best suit, his hair neatly combed and his eyes bright with love as he watched her approach. Elena and Jamie walked slowly down the makeshift aisle between the chairs they'd borrowed for the occasion. When they reached Thomas, Jamie formally placed Elena's hand in his father's. "Take care of her, Papa," Jamie said seriously. "She's special." "I will, son," Thomas promised. "For the rest of my life." The ceremony was simple but beautiful. Elena and Thomas exchanged vows they'd written themselves, promising to support each other through good times and bad, to be partners in all things, and to build a life filled with love and respect. When the preacher pronounced them husband and wife, Thomas kissed Elena gently while their guests cheered. Elena felt like her heart might burst with happiness. The celebration afterward was lively and joyful. Elena's father pulled her aside at one point to tell her how proud he was of the woman she'd become. "When I heard about what happened at that auction," he said, "I was scared for you. But look at you now. You've built something beautiful here." "Thank you, Papa," Elena said, hugging him tightly. "I'm going to take good care of Miguel and Rosa, too. They can visit any time they want, and when they're older, if they want to come live here, they'll always have a home." Her father's eyes filled with tears. "You're a good daughter, Elena. Your mother would be so proud." As the sun began to set, the guests gradually departed, leaving just the 3 members of the new McReady family. They sat on the porch swing, Elena in the middle with Thomas on one side and Jamie on the other, watching the last light fade from the sky. "So what happens now?" Jamie asked. "Now we keep building our life together," Thomas said, reaching across Elena to ruffle his son's hair. "We work hard, we take care of each other, and we remember how lucky we are to be a family." "Are you going to have more babies?" Jamie asked with the directness of childhood. Elena felt her cheeks warm, but she was smiling. "Maybe someday if we're blessed with them." "I hope we do," Jamie said thoughtfully. "I think I'd be a good big brother." "I think you would too," Elena agreed. As they sat there in the growing darkness, Elena reflected on the incredible journey that had brought her to this moment. She'd started as a frightened girl being sold to pay her family's debts. She'd found work and purpose, then friendship and love. Now she was a wife and mother, with a home and a future that looked brighter than anything she could have imagined. "Thank you," she whispered to Thomas. "For what?" "For saving me. For seeing something in me worth saving." Thomas turned to look at her, his eyes serious in the lamplight from the window. "Elena, you saved yourself. You just needed someone to give you the chance. We saved each other," Elena said, thinking about how lost and lonely Thomas and Jamie had been before she arrived. "And now we're going to save this ranch and make it the best one in the territory." "With your business sense and my hard work, I think we can do anything," Thomas agreed. Jamie yawned hugely. "Can we start tomorrow?" "I'm tired from all this wedding excitement." Elena and Thomas laughed. Tomorrow, Elena promised. Tonight we just celebrate. As they got ready for bed, Elena found herself thinking about all the people who had doubted this arrangement would work. The townspeople who had gossiped, Pete Wilson who had tried to take her away, even Helen Crawford who had predicted disaster. They'd all been wrong. What had started as a desperate business transaction had become something beautiful and real. Love had grown where none was expected, and a family had formed from the most unlikely circumstances. Elena stood at her new bedroom window, looking out at the land that was now truly her home. In the distance, she could see the lights of town where her old life had ended, but she wasn't looking backward anymore. She was looking forward to all the tomorrows she'd share with Thomas and Jamie. The girl who had been mocked and sold in chains was gone forever. In her place stood a woman who knew her own strength, who had found her purpose, and who would never again let anyone make her feel like she was worth less than she was. Elena smiled as she prepared for bed on her wedding night. Tomorrow would bring new challenges and new joys, but whatever came, she would face it with the two people she loved most in the world by her side. She had found her place, and she was never letting it go.